I remember once I got into kind of in the rebellious stage, once I turned 13, 14, got into high school, you start learning about macho men and stuff like that, which my dad was not one of those. And I almost felt ashamed because he was so kind and so nice. Everybody loved him, but he wasn't like this big strapping macho guy. And I remember just almost feeling ashamed that he's not the macho guy that I'm looking at, like manly man type thing. And looking back on it now, like it's the biggest compliment in the world when I hear somebody say you're just like your dad.
Welcome to Fatherhood Voices, Breaking the Toxic Cycle. Dive in as real dads bear all, the mess ups, make ups, and every heartfelt moment in between. It's raw, it's real, and it might just change the way you see family.
Welcome to another edition of Fatherhood Voices. And today I have a very special guest. It's someone that I've known for, I've known you for probably about 10 plus years.
10 plus.
And as we've gone through our journeys of just living life, enjoying, and then watching Nick Cook transition into fatherhood. So excited to have him. Not only is he a friend, but he's also a brother that I've had the pleasure of journeying with. Can I say that?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. And journey with?
Part of the story.
Perfect. So been able to journey with him in ceremony and so forth. And I'm excited to now have him on to share his story, his upbringing, and how his relationship looked like with his father, his mother, his siblings, and then also how that impacted his life. And then as he transitioned from early childhood into the teenage years, and then into adulthood, and finally fatherhood. So welcome to another episode of Fatherhood Voices, where our goal is to break the toxic cycle between fathers and their children. Nick, welcome.
Thank you so much. Now, honor to be here. My first podcast. I feel very comfortable sitting in front of little one brothers doing this.
Now, thank you so much, and thank you for agreeing to be on, because sometimes it's a little hard when you're going to be vulnerable and going to share. And so I'm excited to just maybe share a little with the audience, a little bit about yourself, where you grew up at, and then I'll just have you dive into what maybe your earliest childhood memory that you have.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and lived out there for 28 years. Was born to a Mormon family, very devout Mormon family. I had 3 sisters. Not a lot of trauma growing up. I had a really nice upbringing, but as I kind of reflect back as I'm working through my journey, I see areas that created some of the subconscious patterns and beliefs in my life now. But yeah, 3 sisters, 1 older, 2 younger. My mom was very hard. She was a perfectionist. So she had very high expectations of anybody that she interacted with. I would say she was very overprotective too, of her children and the outside world, and probably especially with me. I was the only boy. With my mom, there was a lot of forced things, whether that was you need to go to church on Sundays, you need to play the piano. There wasn't a lot of me choosing to try something new. That was all kind of planned for us. And my dad was kind of completely opposite in the sense that he was probably the kindest man I've ever met, and anybody I've ever talked to would say the same thing about him. And my mom was very kind too. But he always he believed in free agency, and, in my one-on-ones with him, I'll never forget, I got a tattoo when I think I was 17. I was still and I came home from the gym and I was wearing a little bit of a higher shirt. You could see it. And I'll never forget. He's like, "Is that a tattoo?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it is." He's like, "You better not show your mom that." So he believed in teaching, and guiding, but also in giving kids their free agency. He was really good about checking in. I think with my mom, with the whole religious thing, like I'm grateful for the way I was raised. I think religion provides a good structure for family in a lot of ways. But my experience with it was, I was kind of I don't know if you'd say the
black sheep.
I would say the word for it. It was the black sheep in the sense that, it just didn't resonate, and I guess I just don't like the feeling of being forced to do something. I'll never forget. First of all, like in the Mormon religion, church is 3.5 hours on the Sunday. And then it's, no TV, no outdoor activities and things like that. And I could see all my friends, even the friends that were in the church where their parents gave them free agency to go, hang out with friends or do things like that. And I saw that and I'm just like, this is not for me. But I was forced to do so. And whenever I feel like I'm being cornered or forced, I run the other way. And so...
Let me ask you a question, because you said this a couple of times, free agency. So is that a terminology that's kind of been adapted into the Mormon church where some parents are just more liberal? Or is that just something that you kind of connect? Because I like that, because I also have quite a few friends that are in the Mormon church, and some are more very strict with their pillars and their faith, and then some are more liberal. And so I guess they have free agency. So is that something that you came up with, or is that something that's just kind of unspoken in the church?
I would say that's unspoken in the church.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. It's taught in the church that we all have our free agency, which I love.
Wow.
That's a big thing and we can get into my son later, but I'm a big believer in that. But yeah, like... just feeling forced. I think that my mom and I really butted heads from the time I was probably 12 and then, got into the high school and discovered alcohol and a little bit of drugs. I was rebelling wherever I could.
Because of that very stringent structure.
Yeah, and I became kind of an outcast in the family. And so I didn't feel accepted because I was living a little bit of a different lifestyle. And this continued on after I moved out of the house.
So let me ask you a question. And I want to go back, because this free agency, we're not going to get away from this, because this is powerful. This is going to be powerful for parents that are struggling with their faith, but still trying to, I want to say the word, rob their children of the experience, but I'm not going to be that drastic. But embrace that open experience. So I'm going to go there. But before that, it sounds like your mom was very in the masculine, because the masculine and feminine. So how did if your dad was more like laid back and chill and free spirit, free agency, you call it free agency. How did that look like for your mother and father? Because if your mom's the one kind of taking the dominant role and more of the head of the family, and your dad just kind of go in the flow, how did that show up for you as a child? Like, was there some confusion, or you just kind of knew, like, this is a regimen with mom, but with dad, I'm going to have a little bit more freedom? Yeah. How did that show up?
Yeah. So, it definitely, I would definitely say she was living in the masculine, and my dad, I mean, first of all, like, we never saw them fight. I can remember one fight that was over something really small, like my dad bought a wakeboard or something, and they didn't talk about it first. And that really affected me and my sisters once we ended up leaving the house and getting married, because our idea of marriage was like, oh, this is perfect. And then we all get married and we're like calling my mom's, what the hell is this? This is not like what we saw, growing up. So I think, though, part of that is, like, we were always taught between my sisters and I, like, no confrontation, keep the peace. And that I'm still working through in my journey today, people pleasing. trying to kind of take more of a chameleon role with people and not really speaking or expressing my true beliefs. And my sisters and I, since my parents passed, we've unfortunately fallen a little bit further apart, but I've had these discussions with them. Our relationships are a little bit surface level, not a little bit, but they are not. I think that they're improving a little bit with a couple of my sisters. But yeah, it just was very shallow. You couldn't have a tough conversation with each other, which really builds that deeper connection.
Wow.
And more powerful relationship. And so I am still working through that, with my relationships now, really with my relationship with myself, with my son, the people pleasing, and I've made a lot of progress in it. But the no conflict approach definitely had big effects on me into my adult life. And my ex-wife her and I are like perfect mirrors for each other in the sense that she is one that will tell you exactly how she's feeling, regardless of how that makes you feel, which I think can be, if delivered the right way, can be a real act of love, like whether that's just random people that show up in your life, or their friends. When you really tell a friend, like, hey, like I see this, that's an act of love. It might not be what you want to hear right now, but usually what you don't want to hear right now is what you need to hear. And that's why you're feeling that level of resistance inside. So she was a perfect mirror as far as that goes, and helped me as far as being able to express myself and have a deeper conversation with people to build stronger relationships in life. And same thing with my son.
So I just had a download or an epiphany, because I know your ex-wife, and we've journeyed together, and we've developed a bond in the container. And just sharing share your experiences with your mom and how she was very in the masculine and very dominant. I think you married a version of your mother.
Yeah.
And wow.
This is that wow to me too. Like, when we started kind of going through the divorce process last year, it's like, let's think about like how we attracted each other, and she attracted something similar that she hadn't healed yet in herself. But yeah, I would definitely say that.
Wow. Have you forgiven your mother?
I absolutely have. I'd love to tell that part of the story. My mom passed away in 2019 from a very rare form of cancer called peritoneal cancer. I'll never forget, but going back just a few years before that. So when I was about 26, and I'm going to keep kind of going back and going over the place here, but, the whole Mormon religion thing, I moved out of the house as soon as I could. I think I was barely 18 when I moved out, because her and I would just butt heads like that. And, I was doing my own thing. I was partying, having a good time, not being real responsible, but just finally like I don't have to do this. Well, I'm not going to do it. But anyway, like I would still go on Easter or Mother's Day to church for her. But I remember, and, coming from all my sisters being Mormon, I remember even in my early 20s, like my sisters started getting married, and my oldest sister got married when she was 18, started having kids at 18. I didn't have kids until I was 38 years old. My first kid, I should say. But I always remember even going over there for like holidays and stuff. I just felt like a total outcast. First of all, I'd be hungover most times. I'd come out there and party with my so-called friends. And I just felt like an outcast at that point. Like, what do I have in common with you? You guys are having families, the whole Mormon thing. But I remember I had kind of a rock bottom experience when I was 19 or 20. I was living on my own, and I went down to Mexico to party with some friends and ended up getting into an accident where I got ran over by a friend accidentally and was completely backridden. I mean, I messed my ACL up on my left knee. I broke my right foot. And then on the underside of my arm got caught in the back of the wheel well of my friend's truck. I had a stitch or tear going all the way around, so I couldn't go on crutches. I was completely backridden. So my mom took me back in for a good 45 days before I could walk again. And at that point, I decided I'm gonna clean up my life. And the Mormon religion. This is funny too because my dad was my bishop at the time, so he was the bishop of the ward. So you go, it's, I guess in the Catholic thing, it's like confessing your sins and things like that. But I decided to change my thing. There was a lot of pressure on me because I'm the last boy with my name, and I'm the oldest boy in the family on both sides. So there was a lot of pressure, mostly from my mom, like, you need to go on a mission and set an example. And so I started cleaning up my act. I was living at home. I got another job. I was working for my dad at the time when that accident happened. But I started down this path of no drugs, no alcohol, no sex, just kind of going back to church and doing these things. But so, like, a lot of that was the pressure of, well, you're the oldest, you need to be the example, things like that. Anyway, I go 9 months in and I'm clean, and then I end up meeting a girl, my ex-girlfriend in Phoenix, and, we had sex. And so now I could have lied about it and but I've seen this happen with missionaries before where they lie about, not being completely clean for 12 months. And then they go on the mission and stuff starts coming up and they end up coming home. That's one of the greatest blessings I've had, though, in the sense that I was honest about it. And then I completely fell away from the church after that. But it was a blessing in the sense that I was not doing that for me. I was doing it for her and her only. And that's not the reason you go on a mission like that. So anyway, kind of fell off the religious thing again after that short stint. And then this is a long way of getting to your question with my mom. There was fast forward to 25 years old, and I'll never forget, because we just kept butting heads. Another really important lesson they taught me in between their they would take care of my sisters financially, but because I was living a different lifestyle, it's like, we're not going to support you. And I just held all this resentment toward them. I'll never forget, right when I moved out to California, I was living irresponsibly. I wasn't making a ton of money at the time, but I ran into an issue in paying my power bill, and I ended up figuring it out, but they took a hard stance and said, hey, I'm sorry, we just can't help you. But the resentment inside was like, you're helping them just because I'm living a different lifestyle. That was what also a hugely important lesson for me in my life, in the sense that I said to myself at that time, I'm never going to rely on anybody else to pay anything for me. Like, I'm responsible for this, and I'm never going to be in this position again. And I never have been, which is great. But anyway, sitting down with my mom in Phoenix at 26 years old, I'll never forget, we're sitting on a bed, and she just looked at me and she was crying, and she said, look, you're my son, and I love you no matter what lifestyle. Because she always, in her mind, well, if you're not going to live the Mormon thing, like, I can't accept you. And so, like, that level of acceptance where she finally broke down and said, look, I love you either way, any way that you decide to go, changed our entire relationship. And it became much more open, and I didn't feel accepted until we sat down and she broke down and we both cried. But that changed our whole dynamic of the relationship, and her and I got to spend 6 years while she fought cancer Like, she was my closest confidant. My dad also passed away in that time frame, but he had dementia. So the last couple of years, he was kind of checked out. So her and I became very close. Like, there is no resentment in the way that that they raised me either. It's kind of funny though, like, if I could talk about my dad for a minute too. I remember once I got into, when I'm kind of in the rebellious stage, once I turned 13, 14, got into high school, you start learning about macho men and stuff like that, which my dad was not one of those. And I almost felt ashamed because he was so kind and so nice. Everybody loved him, but he wasn't like this big strapping macho guy. And I remember just almost feeling ashamed, like, well, he's not the macho guy that I'm looking at, like, manly man type thing. And looking back on it now, like, it's the biggest compliment in the world when I hear somebody say, you're just like your dad.
Wow.
And him and I were very close, but I just had this perception of what a manly man was. And, you know, it's beautiful to kind of come full circle after he's passed, even before that, you know, he was a manly man. It's just my perception of what that was at the time was a little bit warped.
Wow. And what do you think, why do you think your mother had this change of heart? Like, was it something that happened, or this self-realization that happened where she just finally decided to be vulnerable and have that conversation? Because for a very strong masculine woman to do that, especially when you intertwine faith, most parents will never do that. And but do you know what caused it? Did you ever ask, or did you just accept it with grace? Like, there's got to be a shift that happened.
That's a beautiful question. I never asked that. It didn't come to me to ask that. I imagine it just came to her. Something came to her, because this is before she was sick or anything like that. So, yeah, and I accepted it with grace, and just, like, I think that's part of the limiting belief of I'm not enough that I've been working through too, is because I never felt like accepted by her. But then that happened, and the whole dynamic of the relationship changed at that point.
One conversation, sitting on the bed, when you're 26 years old, altered the dynamics of your relationship. 100%. Wow.
We had a beautiful relationship.
That's freaking powerful. One conversation wiped away a lot of hurt, resentment, animosity. And, you know, that's powerful because, you know, and then this podcast is geared towards fathers, but a lot of mothers listen to it too, and especially single moms that are struggling with a lot of narcissist fathers. But just to know that even with all the hurt, the pain, you go into adulthood, that one conversation shifted things. That's a powerful nugget to remind parents, fathers, especially fathers, but even mothers, that you have the ability to shift the trajectory of a relationship by being vulnerable. But then I'm going to challenge the other party, whether it's the children, once that happens, to find out where that shift happened. Because I think there's so much, there's so many learning opportunities there to maybe help you in your journey. And I wish that you would have gotten that answer, because I don't know, I think there was medicine there, and everything happened the way it was supposed to happen. But the most important thing is you healed that relationship with your mom, and that's beautiful. That's beautiful. How was your father maneuvering through this? Of course, I'm sure he's ecstatic now that you guys, you know, kind of created a truce, and now you guys are reconnecting. But up until that point, you know, and because he's the bishop, but he's still trying to allow you find your way. How's he navigating through all this with your relationship with him?
Sure. And before we get into that, my mom and my dad, they still come into my dreams. Like, we are still very connected. So it's not too late to ask that question.
Perfect.
But, you know, my dad was always kind of neutral in the whole thing. I mean, he would always call me. So funny. Like, I remember living in San Luca and a bunch of different places in California. When I moved back here, he'd send the missionaries over. Even though I said I'm not in, they'd come over, and sometimes they'd be hungover. And, you know, I'm always nice to people, but he was always there, you know, and he would always check in with me, you know, once a month. And so he was always kind of neutral in the thing. Maybe he had something to do with that as well. So
good. Wow.
So yeah, nothing's.
And then just with the dynamics of your dad, and once you guys had this moment, did the relationship change with you guys? Did it strengthen your relationship with your dad? Or was it always just, you always had a good relationship with him?
No, I think it did. I think it did because I felt accepted by my whole family once we had that conversation. You know, and I started looking at my dad differently the more I started to learn about, you know, okay, like this picture of what a manly man is supposed to be is maybe not the picture. And I think that all kind of came together. I gave his eulogy. It was offered to me first because I'm the oldest son after he passed, 4 months after my mom passed. And at first I'm just like, I don't want to do this. Like, but I knew inside that if I didn't do this, like I would really regret it. And it ended up being just a beautiful experience to be able to give his eulogy and then reflect back on like how similar I am to him, you know, which is a high compliment. Makes me feel really good. Now, if you talked to me when I was 14, I would have been ashamed, like I said, but he was a real man. You know, I think they weren't maybe equipped though to teach me about how to process emotions and things like that, like a lot of men in America. You know, so when they did pass, I had also started a business. I just got married 6 months before, just had a baby. Well, maybe a year before, and then had a baby 6 months before. So I had a lot of things going on. The business I started, all of the pressure was on me because I'm in charge of business development. We needed to have business in order to have a product. So I'd never forget, I was going back and forth to Phoenix, where my parents were, every single week to spend time with them and still build the business. But even after they passed, and they passed we started the business in 2019. My mom in September, my mom passes in December 2019. My dad passes in April 2020. But I didn't, the way I dealt with all of this stuff happening in such a short amount of time, this traumatic stuff, was just to bury myself in the work, and didn't process anything. And I became less present with my wife at the time, my son. A lot of negative things happened because of that. I came to realization of all of that after the fact, but I didn't take the time to process all the feelings and emotions. I just put my head down and just worked hard. That's how I knew how to deal with that type of thing at the time. So I'm still unpacking that. You know, it's been 5 years, almost 5 years now. But it's cool though, because sometimes, and I'll just break down, like whether it's just looking at a picture or something like that. And I never did that I did the first day, obviously, but I didn't take the time to really allow myself to feel everything, you know, from that traumatic experience. But I'm having those even just a couple months ago. I just sat there and broke down for like 30 minutes. It was beautiful just to let it out, you know.
So if you can take one sentence from his eulogy. That sums up your dad. Was he father or was he dad? Because father's just take on the name, but dad is dad.
It was dad.
Okay. you could take 1 or 2 sentences to reflect on, Dad, what would that look like?
I feel like he was, I don't remember the sentences, but if you talk to me or my sisters, he was always there for us. He was even up until the end in his dementia where we had to take his phone away. He was always doing his monthly or bi-weekly check-ins with his kids to see where they were at. Regardless of what rebellious stage I was in, he would still check in. I think he cared a lot about his kids. I know that he cared a lot about his kids. I mean, even in the whole Mormon thing, him sending the missionaries over, true concern and deeply cared for his kids and my mom and his wife. So just a devoted man, definitely a man of faith. And yeah, I just have so much respect for him. He was a real man. Now that I kind of look back at it now, you know.
So you just pulled out a very powerful best practice, and that's he did his check-ins.
Mm-hmm.
So those check-ins meant a lot.
They did, and I think they mean more to me now. Obviously, he's not here anymore than they did then, but like really checking in, like really, like how are you doing? Not surface level stuff. How are you doing in these different areas? And he would never like force an opinion or anything like that. He would always give his guidance, but not, which I really appreciate, because sometimes as parents we want to just tell the kids like, hey, this is what you need to be doing, things like that. But there's the way that he did it was beautiful in the sense that it wasn't. And sometimes, I mean, you know, sometimes you just need somebody to sit in the mud with you and you be able to just talk about the shit that's going through you right now. And he was that guy. He was that guy that would just listen. If you wanted him to just listen, he would listen and not be forcing opinions or things like that on you. And that's a big deal. Like, he taught me a lot of compassion through that. And yeah.
And so were these check-ins like structured every week, or how many times a month did you check in, and were they like the same time every week or every month?
Yeah, they were when I was younger. I think that comes from the religious. It was like I forget what they called them. But it was like a monthly check-in where he'd come sit with me and sit by my sister for 30 minutes. But he continued that informally after we've all left and, you know, start families and things like that, where it was just, he would just call in to check in every 2 weeks. And it wouldn't be scheduled, wouldn't be formal, but every time, and it wasn't, he was initiating it, which was beautiful too. Literally every month on the dot, like he must have had it on his calendar or something. He just knew. I didn't check in, see how everything's going. So
that's power. You know, the two most important lessons I've gotten from this podcast are beautiful lessons. Is one, the check-in, how important it is for fathers to check in with their children. And then now that he's passed, you sharing that, you look back on it and realize how profound it was for you.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't surface level conversations, but they were deep dive conversations. So that's important. And the second thing is when you talked about free range, and whether it's religion or whatever topic you want to put in, but just knowing that a father has the ability to pick and choose what's going to work for the way he raises his children. So those two things have been powerful, because there's medicine in there for people, especially fathers, free range, and then also the check-in. Let's fast forward now into, you've shared some of your upbringing and the relationship with your father and your mother. How did that show up for you now becoming a father in your 30s?
Yeah, it's been honestly the most beautiful experience. I feel like you know, I think my ex-wife is a great mirror too, but your children, they're the best teachers. They really are. You know, anytime those triggers come up, I recognize, I'm aware, okay, there's something there that I need to work with, to deal with. And he's 5 now, so he's like very interactive, and he'll ask me really good questions. You know, sometimes he'll ask me a question about like a automatic programming that I have. I'll say something like, why did you say that? I'm like, that's a great question. I think my ex-wife and I do really, really well with him, as far as she has her programs, I have my programs that we're trying to unravel or reprogram, I guess I should say. But we always explain that to him. Like, we're consciously like, hey, that's, daddy was raised this way, so this is why I react that way. You don't have to act that way, though. So I never wanted to make, and even like when we were going through our things, my ex-wife and I, it's like, hey, this is not, that has nothing to do with you. You know, you did nothing wrong. Because, I mean, they say that the children, whenever there's a conflict or something, feels it the most and feels like they've done something wrong. And we've been very clear with them, like, you know, through this whole process, that this has nothing to do with him. You know, we loved him. You know, I've learned a lot of patience, like most parents. I'm a pretty patient person as it is, but you know, these kids, they teach you more about yourself than anything from the moment that they come out. It taught me a lot about compassion, and I feel like I'm parenting myself, you know, at the same time as I'm parenting him. And kids are so honest too. So he's at the age now where I can ask him certain things. He'll give me a really honest, like if I'm looking for feedback as a father, he'll give me a really honest answer. And it's like, oh yeah, that's a really good point. But I always look at, you know, the trigger points when something's happening with him and he's going through his emotions. Like, hey, like I understand you have these big emotions right now, like let's kind of talk through that. I think that it's an ongoing lesson for me to be compassionate with myself too, which is beautiful. And just her and I teaching him, hey, like him understanding the emotions that are coming to him, because they don't know how to express them when they're real young, and we're really consciously working on making sure he understands the different emotions, what they are, that it's okay. Like everybody has emotions. We came here to experience life, and that's everything. It's not just, and I feel like I blocked a lot of the negative emotions. I suppressed those, and like, which is what my ex-wife was like, well, you're so positive all the time. And it's like, that's not realistic. Like, we came here to experience the ups and downs, everything. And that's how you can really know yourself, I think I would say. And it's still part of that journey, but we're very conscious. I'm very conscious with him of making sure we sit down when he's having the emotions, that we're not abandoning him. And I'm not saying the whole journey's been perfect, because we're getting to that point. We've evolved to that point, but yeah, I just think it's important to teach these children at a young age, you know, that about the emotions, and it's okay. You're safe. I'm here for you. You know, the compassion and things like that. So it's been beautiful, and his and I, our connection has really deepened, especially over the last few months, I would say. So,
wow, I'm gonna have to bring you back on again. There's so much more to cover, and
come back on.
Well, we'd love to, because there's so many more layers. We're going to go and start the process of wrapping it up. I apologize, we did get delayed with some technical difficulties. Crazy schedule today, but what are your closing thoughts that you can just kind of take from your experience growing up, and from a structured, very religious household to rebellion to be given free range to knowing that your dad still checked in, and then going through the motions, having that healing process with your mom. You've peeled a lot of layers, and this is not, we're not even talking about plant medicine or journey so forth, which is, there's so much more to cover. But from what you've learned so far, what are your final thoughts on, and you started to share a lot, but what would be your most profound experience of what you're taking away from your life lessons from childhood into adulthood and into parenthood with your son?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that free agency part, like with my son Matthew, I want him to try a lot of different things, and I want him to feel enabled and empowered, not just with what I think he should do. And my ex-wife is very aligned with that. So it's kind of been beautiful to have him discover what he wants to do, and, you know, working on that compassion piece with him. And really, at the end of the day, it's like, it's deeply caring for him, like the connection. And that could be small things, like a couple small things. Recently, I would always cook him breakfast or dinner or whatever, and then I'd still be up. And now it's like, okay, like, I'm going to cook it. We're going to sit down together. Just little things like that, where we're looking at each other's eyes and you can just feel the connection. It's been beautiful. I feel like I've learned how to deeply care for somebody with him.
Wow. Well, thank you for coming on and being vulnerable and sharing a lot of your life story. And that's the wrap for another episode of Fatherhood Voices, where our goal is to break the toxic cycle between fathers and their children.